The numbers don't lie, but they also can't scream. On the night of March 9, 1945, more people died in 6 hours than in any single air attack in human history. Not Hiroshima, not Nagasaki, not Dresden, Tokyo. 100,000 souls, maybe more, incinerated in a firestorm so intense that steel melted, canals boiled, and the sky itself seemed to burn. This wasn't just warfare. This was apocalypse delivered from above, orchestrated by a mild-mannered general who believed he was saving lives by taking them. And tonight, you're going to learn the truth that history textbooks whisper about in footnotes. If this story disturbs you, and it should, then share it. Because the world has spent 8 decades looking the other way, and someone needs to remember their names. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to witness will change how you understand war, morality, and the price of victory forever. March 1945. Japan is dying, but it refuses to fall. American soldiers are bleeding out on Pacific islands with names most people can't pronounce: Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Peleliu. Every foot of ground costs gallons of blood. In Washington, military planners stare at maps and calculations that turn their stomachs. An invasion of mainland Japan, Operation Downfall, will require 1 million American casualties, maybe more. The Japanese have proven they'll fight to the last man, woman, and child. Civilians are training with bamboo spears. School children are learning how to throw themselves under tanks. In this crucible of desperation, one man holds a terrible power. His name is Curtis LeMay, and he's 38 years old, younger than most middle managers today. But he commands the 21st Bomber Command with absolute authority. LeMay is not a monster in appearance. He's stocky, jowled, perpetually clenching an unlit cigar between his teeth. He looks like someone's disappointed uncle. But behind those tired eyes burns a ruthless pragmatism that will reshape the rules of warfare itself. LeMay has a problem. His B-29 superfortresses, the most advanced bombers ever built, technological marvels costing more than the Manhattan Project, are failing. For months, they've been conducting high-altitude precision bombing runs over Japan, trying to hit factories and military installations. The results are pathetic. At 30,000 feet, fierce winds scatter bombs across miles. Cloud cover obscures targets. The bombing accuracy rate is less than 10%. Meanwhile, B-29s are being shot down, crews are dying, and Japan's war machine keeps grinding forward. LeMay studies intelligence reports in his headquarters on Guam. He reads about Japan's cities, and a dark pattern emerges. Unlike American cities built from steel and concrete, Japanese urban centers are constructed primarily from wood and paper. 16 million people in Tokyo alone, packed into neighborhoods so dense that streets barely allow 2 people to pass side by side. The buildings aren't just flammable, they're kindling. Entire districts could burn like matchboxes. But there's something else in these reports, something that makes the decision ahead both easier and more horrifying. Japan's war production isn't concentrated in large factories. It's dispersed throughout residential areas. Homes double as workshops where women and children assemble aircraft components, forge munitions, sew uniforms. The war machine and the civilian population are inseparable. This is what LeMay tells himself anyway, as he makes the decision that will define his legacy. He calls his staff officers together in late February. What he proposes is so radical, so dangerous, that several officers think he's lost his mind. LeMay wants to strip the B-29s of their defensive guns and gunners to carry more bombs. He wants to fly at just 5,000 feet, low enough that anti-aircraft fire will tear them apart like paper. And he wants to abandon precision altogether. Instead, they'll carpet bomb residential areas with a new weapon, the M69 incendiary cluster bomb. The M69 is diabolical in its simplicity. Each cluster contains 38 hexagonal tubes filled with napalm, a jellied gasoline that sticks to everything it touches and burns at over 1,000 degrees. When the cluster opens, these tubes scatter across a wide area, each one detonating and spraying flaming gel in all directions. It's not designed to destroy buildings. It's designed to set them on fire and burn everything inside them. We're going to scorch and boil and bake to death more people in Tokyo on that night than went up in vapor at Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined, LeMay will later admit. But in March 1945, he frames it differently to his crews. He tells them this will shorten the war. He tells them this will save American lives. He tells them the Japanese people and the Japanese war effort cannot be separated. What he doesn't tell them, what perhaps he doesn't fully grasp himself, is that he's about to unleash something humanity has never witnessed before. Not a battle, not a bombing raid, a deliberate firestorm, an artificial hell. In Tokyo, the people have no idea what's coming. They've endured American bombing raids before, the high-altitude attacks that seemed almost random, destroying a building here, a factory there. Air raid sirens have become part of daily life's background noise. When they wail, people dutifully file to shelters or lie flat in their homes, waiting for the all-clear. Michiko Kiyo-oka is 17 years old. She lives in the Fukagawa ward, a working-class neighborhood near the Sumida River. Her father was killed 2 years ago during the naval battle at Midway. Her older brother died on Guadalcanal. Now it's just Michiko, her mother, and her 6-year-old sister Fumiko in their small wooden home. Michiko works during the day at a factory making parachutes. At night, she's part of the neighborhood fire brigade, civilians trained to fight fires with buckets of water and wet blankets. She thinks this training is ridiculous. If American bombs hit your house, she reasons, it either explodes or it doesn't. What good is a bucket of water against that? But the authorities insist. Every neighborhood has its fire brigade. It gives people something to do, some sense of control in a world that's spiraling into chaos. On March 9th, Michiko returns home exhausted. She's been working 12-hour shifts, and her fingers are cramped from the repetitive work. Her mother has prepared a small dinner, rice and pickled vegetables. Protein is a distant memory. As they eat, the radio broadcasts the usual propaganda about Japanese victories and American setbacks. Nobody believes it anymore, but nobody says so out loud. Speaking defeatist thoughts can get you arrested. After dinner, Michiko helps Fumiko practice her reading. Her sister is learning the complex kanji characters that make written Japanese so difficult. Fumiko struggles with the character for peace. Ironic, Michiko thinks. When was the last time any of them knew peace? Around midnight, they prepare for bed. The house is cold despite the early spring. They sleep together for warmth, 3 bodies pressed close under thin blankets. Outside, Tokyo is quiet, except for the distant sound of streetcars and the occasional patrol of civil defense wardens checking that blackout curtains are properly closed. At Guam, 1,500 miles to the south, the operation is beginning. 334 B-29s are loading their bomb bays. Each plane carries 6 tons of M69 incendiary clusters, 2,000 tons of firebombs in total. The crews are nervous. Flying at 5,000 feet without defensive guns feels like suicide. But LeMay has bet everything on this mission. If it fails, he'll be relieved of command. If it succeeds, the war might finally turn. The first B-29 lifts off at sunset, then another, and another. They form up over the dark Pacific, an aerial armada unprecedented in scale. The pilots can't see each other in the darkness, but they maintain formation through radio contact and sheer discipline. Their target, the Shitamachi district of eastern Tokyo, home to over 1 million people living in wooden houses, packed together like dominoes. The Pathfinder aircraft arrive first over Tokyo just after midnight. Their job is to mark the target zone with napalm bombs in a giant X pattern. They meet surprisingly light resistance. Japanese air defenses are depleted, their fighters grounded by fuel shortages and pilot losses. The Pathfinders complete their mission and radio back. Target marked. Primary bombing force. You are cleared hot. The air raid sirens begin wailing at 12:15 a.m. In her home, Michiko jerks awake. Not again, she thinks. She nudges her mother and sister. Come on, we need to go to the shelter. But her mother is already awake, listening to something. Wait, she whispers. Listen. Over the sirens, there's another sound. A deep, thrumming drone that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. It grows louder, louder. The wooden walls of their house begin to vibrate. Michiko has heard American bombers before, but never like this. This sounds like the sky itself is growling. Now, her mother shouts. They throw on clothes and rush outside. The street is chaos, neighbors pouring from houses, some heading for the public shelter, others frozen in confusion. The sound is overwhelming now, a mechanical thunder that drowns out the sirens. Michiko looks up. The sky is full of them, massive dark shapes moving across the stars. Scores of them, maybe hundreds. She's never seen so many planes at once, and they're low. She can almost make out details, the twin tails, the silver fuselages catching moonlight. They're so low she could throw a stone and hit them. "The shelter!" her mother screams, grabbing Fumiko's hand. They run. The public shelter is 3 blocks away, a reinforced concrete building that the neighborhood shares. People are streaming toward it from all directions. An old man falls, and the crowd flows around him. Michiko stops to help him up. "Leave me," he shouts. "Save yourself!" But she gets him to his feet, and they stumble forward together. That's when the first bombs fall. She doesn't see them drop, but she sees the result. 3 blocks away, the night suddenly turns to day. A blossom of orange fire erupts from a cluster of houses, then another and another. The M69 clusters are opening in mid-air, scattering their deadly payload across entire neighborhoods. Each impact spawns dozens of smaller fires. Within 60 seconds, 50 fires are burning. Within 5 minutes, hundreds. The bombers are flying in formation, each one releasing its load in a precise pattern designed to create overlapping coverage. There will be no gaps, no safe zones. The entire target area, 15 square miles of residential Tokyo, is being systematically ignited. Michiko and her group reach the shelter and pour inside. It's already packed, 200 people in a space meant for 100. The smell of sweat and fear is overpowering. Someone pulls the heavy steel door closed, muffling the chaos outside. For a moment, there's almost relief. They're safe. Concrete walls, a reinforced roof. The bombs can't reach them here. But Michiko knows about fire from her civil defense training. Fire doesn't need to penetrate walls. Fire consumes oxygen, and this shelter has one air vent. Outside, something unprecedented is happening. Curtis LeMay has created perfect conditions for a firestorm, a self-sustaining atmospheric phenomenon where fire becomes a living force. The hundreds of individual fires are merging, growing, feeding on the densely packed wooden structures. As fire consumes oxygen, it creates a vacuum. Cool air rushes in from the periphery to fill that vacuum, creating winds. These winds feed the fire with fresh oxygen, making it burn hotter. The hotter fire creates a stronger vacuum, pulling in more wind, creating a feedback loop. Within 30 minutes, winds inside the fire zone are reaching 70 miles per hour. Embers the size of fists are being lifted hundreds of feet into the air and carried blocks away, starting new fires. The temperature at ground level is approaching 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt glass, to ignite telephone poles, to cause human bodies to spontaneously combust before the flames even touch them. Saburo Ienaga, a 30-year-old schoolteacher, watches this develop from his rooftop 3 miles away. He's a fire watcher, another civilian defense role. His job is to spot fires in his neighborhood and coordinate the local response. But what he's watching isn't fires. It's a single, unified inferno stretching across the horizon. The entire eastern sky is glowing red-orange, pulsing like a living thing. He can feel the heat on his face from 3 miles away. Then he sees something that makes his blood freeze. The fire is creating its own weather. Hot air rising from the inferno forms a column that reaches thousands of feet high. At the top, moisture condenses into a cloud. But this isn't a normal cloud. It's laced with smoke and lit from below by the fire's glow. It looks like a demon rising from hell. And from this cloud, things are falling. Not rain. The heat is too intense for water to survive. Instead, it's raining hot ash and embers. And something else, something Saburo doesn't want to identify, but knows with horrible certainty. Pieces of burned debris, fragments of buildings, and pieces of people, cremated and lifted by the superheated air. The bombing runs continue for nearly 3 hours. B-29 crews report that they can smell burning flesh at 5,000 feet. The smoke and heat are so intense that several planes are flipped by turbulence. Tail gunners, kept on Pathfinder aircraft, vomit in their positions from the stench and the sight. One pilot will later write in his diary, "The fire looked like the entire city was melting. I tried to tell myself we were hitting military targets, but I knew, we all knew, we were burning people alive." In the shelter, Michiko and the others are discovering the horror of their situation. The temperature inside is rising. At first, it's merely uncomfortable, then it becomes oppressive. People are stripping off layers of clothing, fanning themselves desperately. Children are crying. The elderly are gasping for breath. "We need to open the door," someone shouts, "just for a moment, to let in fresh air." "No," the shelter warden, an older man named Tanaka, blocks the door. "It's fire out there. The moment we open this, we die." "We're dying in here," a woman screams. She's right. The air is thinning. The single vent can't provide enough oxygen for 200 people. They're slowly suffocating. Michiko's little sister Fumiko has stopped crying. Her lips are turning blue. Their mother holds her, rocking back and forth, muttering prayers to gods who seem to have abandoned Tokyo entirely. Michiko feels herself growing dizzy. Her thoughts are becoming fuzzy, disconnected. Is this how it ends? Not burned, but suffocated in a concrete box designed to save them. Outside, the firestorm reaches its peak intensity. The fire is so hot that it's creating its own air circulation system. Winds near ground level are now exceeding 100 miles per hour, strong enough to uproot trees and tear roofs off buildings. People trying to flee are picked up by these winds and thrown into the flames. Those who jump into canals and rivers to escape the heat discover a new horror. So many people have the same idea, that the waterways are packed solid with bodies. Some drown. Others are boiled alive as the water temperature rises. A young mother named Haruko Yamashita makes a decision that will haunt her for the rest of her life. She's trapped in the middle of the fire zone with her 3 children, ages 8, 5, and 2. The fire is closing in from all sides. Her house is already burning. The street is a tunnel of flames. She knows they can't outrun it. So she does what she thinks is mercy. She takes her children behind the house to their small garden, where they grew vegetables before food became scarce. She makes them lie down side by side. She tells them to close their eyes and think of something beautiful. Then she takes a kitchen knife and cuts each of their throats, quickly and cleanly. She holds the 2-year-old as he bleeds out, singing him a lullaby. Then she lies down beside them and cuts her own throat. The fire finds them minutes later, a mother and 3 children in a neat row in a garden, already dead. This is mercy in Tokyo on the night of March 9, 1945. At 3 a.m., the last B-29 releases its payload and turns for home. The crews are silent on the return flight. There's none of the usual banter, no celebration. They've just participated in something that feels less like a military operation and more like an atrocity. But Curtis LeMay's gamble has succeeded beyond his expectations. Not a single B-29 was shot down over Tokyo. The Japanese air defenses were overwhelmed, unable to respond to the sheer scale of the attack. In the shelter, Michiko wakes to realize she's passed out. The air is slightly better now. The people around her have become still, many unconscious or dead from oxygen deprivation. Fumiko is limp in their mother's arms. Michiko's training kicks in. She checks her sister's pulse. It's there, weak and thready, but there. She checks her mother, also alive. The shelter warden, Tanaka, is making a decision. The bombing sounds have stopped. The building hasn't taken a direct hit. If they stay in here much longer, everyone will suffocate. But if they open the door to a raging fire, everyone will burn. He cracks the door open an inch. Hot air rushes in, but not the wall of flame he feared. The fire has moved, chasing its own winds, following the path of available fuel. He opens the door wider. The street outside is transformed into a vision of hell, but it's passable. Buildings are burning on both sides, but the street itself is clear. "We go now," he shouts. "Stay together, move fast." The survivors pour out of the shelter. Less than half who entered are still conscious or able to walk. Michiko drags Fumiko, who's barely responsive. Her mother stumbles beside them. The heat is incredible, like standing in front of a blast furnace. The air itself seems to be burning. Michiko can feel her exposed skin beginning to blister. They run through a landscape that no longer resembles Tokyo. Every building is either burning or already collapsed. Bodies line the streets, some charred beyond recognition, others seemingly untouched but killed by heat stroke or suffocation. A businessman in a suit sits against a wall, looking almost peaceful, as if he sat down for a rest and simply never got up. He's dead, cooked from the inside by the superheated air. Michiko sees things she'll spend the rest of her life trying to forget. A group of school children huddled in a circle, their bodies fused together by the heat. A mother clutching a bundle that was once a baby. A horse on its side, its flesh split open like overcooked meat. The Sumida River, usually peaceful, is clogged with thousands of bodies floating in steaming water. They're heading north, away from the center of the fire zone. Others have the same idea. They join a stream of refugees, all moving in the same direction, all with the same 1,000-yard stare of those who've witnessed the unwitnessable. Some are horribly burned, their skin hanging in sheets. Others seem physically fine, but are psychologically shattered, wandering in circles, calling names of people who are certainly dead. As dawn breaks, Michiko and her family reach the edge of the burn zone. They collapse in a park that was spared. Around them, survivors continue to arrive, an exodus of smoke-stained ghosts. Some medical workers are setting up a triage station, but it's hopeless. There are thousands of wounded and dying, and medical supplies for maybe 100. Fumiko opens her eyes. "Ne-san," she whispers to Michiko, "I'm thirsty." It's the most beautiful sound Michiko has ever heard. Her sister is alive. They're alive. Somehow, impossibly, they survived. Back in the burn zone, the fires continue to rage. They'll burn for 4 more days before finally exhausting their fuel. By then, 16 square miles of Tokyo, almost 40% of the city's urban area, will be reduced to ash and rubble. 100,000 people are dead, perhaps as many as 130,000. Another 1 million are homeless. The exact number will never be known because entire families were vaporized, leaving no one to report them missing. Entire neighborhoods were erased so completely that months later, survivors won't be able to identify where their homes once stood. On Guam, Curtis LeMay reviews the reconnaissance photographs. He shows no emotion. When a subordinate remarks on the scale of destruction, LeMay responds with cold pragmatism. It's the same as if we'd burned down a bunch of empty warehouses. If people get in the way of military targets, that's their problem. But privately, he confides to an aide. "I suppose if I'd lost the war, I'd have been tried as a war criminal." He's right to be worried, but he won't be tried. Because America wins the war. Winners write the history books, and winners decide who the war criminals are. The Tokyo firebombing, officially designated Operation Meetinghouse, will be classified as a legitimate military operation. LeMay will go on to become a 4-star general and run for vice president of the United States. He'll be celebrated as the man who shortened the war, the brilliant strategist who saved American lives. But here's what the history books don't often mention. Operation Meetinghouse was not an isolated incident. Encouraged by its success, LeMay ordered similar raids on 67 other Japanese cities over the next 5 months. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama, each one devastated by incendiary bombing. By the time the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, conventional firebombing had already killed more Japanese civilians than both nuclear weapons combined. Think about that for a moment. We remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're seared into our collective consciousness as the ultimate horrors of World War II. But Tokyo was worse. It was always worse. We just don't talk about it. Why not? Is it because nuclear weapons fit our narrative of unprecedented evil, while burning cities feels somehow more conventional, more acceptable? Is it because acknowledging the scale of the firebombing campaign forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the morality of our victory? What do you think? Can killing 100,000 civilians ever be justified if it potentially saves more lives in the long run? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This isn't just history. This is a moral question that echoes through every conflict since. Saburo Ienaga, the school teacher who watched the firestorm from his rooftop, survives the war. In the decades that follow, he becomes one of Japan's most controversial historians, spending his life documenting what happened that night and fighting to ensure it's taught accurately in Japanese schools. The government resists. The official narrative is that Japan was a victim of American aggression, that the firebombing and nuclear attacks were unprovoked acts of barbarism. But Ienaga knows it's more complicated than that. He remembers what Japan did in China, the rape of Nanking, the biological warfare experiments, the comfort women forced into sexual slavery. He remembers the fanatical military culture that sent young men on suicide missions and convinced civilians that surrender was worse than death. He becomes convinced that his country's suffering, while immense, was partly self-inflicted by the militarist government that refused to surrender even as defeat became inevitable. This makes him unpopular. Nationalist groups send him death threats. The government removes his textbooks from schools. But he persists because he believes that understanding the full truth, both Japan's atrocities and the atrocities committed against Japan, is the only way to prevent it from happening again. In 1947, Saburo manages to interview Curtis LeMay during the American occupation. He asks the general if he ever regrets the firebombing campaign. LeMay's answer is complicated. Every military action in war kills innocent people, he says. The question isn't whether it's morally right. War itself is immoral. The question is whether it's necessary. I believed then, and I believe now, that firebombing Japanese cities saved lives by forcing an earlier surrender. If we'd had to invade Japan, millions would have died, Japanese and American. I chose the lesser evil. But 100,000 people in a single night, Saburo presses. Women, children, the elderly, people who had no say in their government's actions, no control over the war. How do you carry that? LeMay is silent for a long moment. Finally, he says, I don't sleep well, haven't since 1945. Every night, I wake up at 3 a.m., which was about when the Tokyo raid ended. I lie there and do the math. 100,000 deaths divided by 6 hours equals 277 deaths per minute. I watched the clock tick through that raid. Every time the minute hand moved, 277 more people died because of my orders. You ask how I carry it? I don't. It carries me. Michiko Kiyo-oka survives the war, but never fully recovers. Her sister Fumiko suffers from respiratory problems for the rest of her life. The smoke and chemical-laced air from that night permanently damaged her lungs. She dies at 23 from pneumonia, an infection her scarred lungs can't fight off. Michiko always believes that the firebombing killed her sister, just 20 years late. Michiko herself never marries, never has children. She works as a seamstress in post-war Tokyo, living a quiet, unremarkable life. But every year, on March 9th, she takes the train to the Sumida River and stands at the spot where she witnessed thousands of bodies floating in the boiling water. She's been coming for 60 years, ever since that night. She brings flowers and throws them into the river. She whispers the names of neighbors who died, keeping their memory alive because no one else will. In 2002, a young journalist finds her there and asks if she'll tell her story. Michiko is 74 now, her hands shaking with age, but her eyes are sharp. Why should I? She asks. Americans don't want to hear about Tokyo. They want to hear about Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima. They want to be victims or reluctant heroes. They don't want to hear about the night they murdered my neighbors. The journalist, a third-generation Japanese-American named Amy Nakamura, persists. I need to hear it, she says. My grandfather flew in that raid. He was a B-29 navigator. He never talked about it, but I found his diary after he died. He wrote, "We burned them alive. God forgive us. We burned them alive." I need to understand what he saw. Michiko studies this young woman with her American accent and her Japanese face, a living bridge between two worlds that collided so violently. Finally, she nods. They sit on a bench overlooking the river, and Michiko talks for 4 hours. She describes the sound of the bombers, the heat, the shelter, the dawn walk through hell. She describes her sister's blue lips, her mother's prayers, the businessman sitting peacefully against the wall, already dead. Your grandfather, Michiko says when she's done. Did he come back from the war? Yes, Amy says. He married my grandmother, had 3 children, became an engineer. He lived a good life. But he didn't forget. No, I don't think he could. Good, Michiko says. Forgetting is the only real sin. Not what you did or what was done to you, but forgetting that it happened at all. Tell people about your grandfather's diary. Tell people about this conversation. The numbers can't scream, so we have to scream for them. The Tokyo firebombing changed warfare fundamentally. It established that in total war, the distinction between civilian and military targets could be blurred beyond recognition. It demonstrated that modern technology had given humanity the power to inflict death on an unprecedented scale. And it proved that even democracies, even nations that valued human rights and individual dignity, could commit acts of mass killing when they believed it was necessary. This legacy echoes through every conflict since: the carpet bombing of Vietnam, the shock and awe campaign in Iraq, the drone strikes that kill terrorist leaders along with whoever happens to be standing nearby. Each time, the justification is the same. These actions, however horrific, will save lives in the long run. Each time, we calculate the moral mathematics of acceptable death. But Michiko would tell you that those calculations are made from behind desks and in conference rooms by people who've never smelled burning flesh or watched a river fill with bodies. The math changes when you're standing in the fire. Curtis LeMay retired from the military in 1965 as a 4-star general, the youngest 4-star in Air Force history when he received his rank. His career after Tokyo was extraordinary. He ran the Berlin airlift, saving West Berlin from Soviet starvation tactics. He built the Strategic Air Command into the most powerful military force in history, the nuclear shield that arguably prevented World War III during the Cold War. He was respected, feared, and remarkably effective. But he was also dangerous, and he knew it. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, LeMay was one of the Joint Chiefs pushing President Kennedy to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against Soviet missile sites in Cuba. Kennedy refused, opting for a naval blockade instead. We now know that Soviet submarines near Cuba were armed with nuclear torpedoes and had authorization to use them if attacked. LeMay's preferred course of action would have likely triggered nuclear war. After the crisis passed, Kennedy remarked to his brother Robert, "Thank God for Curtis LeMay. If it wasn't for him, none of us would have had to worry about the Soviets, because we'd all be dead." The president's tone was unclear. Was it sincere gratitude or cutting sarcasm? Probably both. In 1968, LeMay ran as George Wallace's vice presidential candidate on a third-party ticket, advocating racial segregation and aggressive military action in Vietnam. They lost badly. LeMay's reputation, which had survived the firebombing of Japan, never recovered from his association with Wallace's explicitly racist campaign. He spent his final years writing memoirs that few read and giving interviews where he defended every decision he'd ever made. He died in 1990 at age 83. His funeral was a military affair with full honors. Protesters stood outside with signs reading "War Criminal" and "Tokyo Remembers." Inside, Air Force generals eulogized him as a visionary who understood the brutal logic of warfare. Both groups were correct. The dichotomy of Curtis LeMay, brilliant strategist or mass murderer, savior of American lives or architect of atrocity, reflects the fundamental paradox of the Tokyo firebombing itself. Was it a legitimate military operation or a war crime? The answer depends entirely on which moral framework you use to evaluate it. From a utilitarian perspective, if the firebombing campaign genuinely shortened the war and prevented the million-plus casualties expected from Operation Downfall, then it was morally justified. 100,000 deaths are preferable to 1 million deaths. The math is cold but clear. From a deontological perspective, the idea that certain acts are intrinsically wrong regardless of their consequences, deliberately targeting civilians with weapons designed to burn them alive, is murder on a massive scale. No potential future benefit can justify it. The ends don't justify the means, especially when the means involve incinerating children in their beds. From a legal perspective, the answer is murky. The Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907 prohibited the bombardment of undefended cities and required attackers to minimize civilian casualties. But Japan had fortified Tokyo with anti-aircraft guns, making it arguably defended. And with war production dispersed throughout residential areas, were civilians truly non-combatants? The laws of war were written for 19th century conflicts and struggled to address 20th century total war. Perhaps most disturbingly, from a practical perspective, the firebombing was simply effective. It destroyed Japan's capacity to wage war, demoralized the population, and contributed to the decision to surrender. Whether it was right or wrong, it worked. And in warfare, what works tends to be repeated. This is the legacy we've inherited: the willingness to kill massive numbers of civilians if military necessity demands it, the ability to rationalize mass death through statistical analysis and strategic objectives, the technology to deliver apocalyptic destruction with clinical precision. We didn't learn these things on August 6, 1945, when the Enola Gay dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. We learned them on March 9, 1945, when 334 B-29s turned Tokyo into a furnace. In Japan, there's a small museum dedicated to the Tokyo firebombing. It's not well funded or widely visited. The exhibits include charred artifacts recovered from the burn zone, photographs of the destruction, and personal accounts from survivors. In one corner, there's a section dedicated to Haruko Yamashita, the mother who killed her children to spare them from burning alive. The exhibit includes a photo of Haruko and her 3 children taken months before the raid. They're smiling, dressed in their best clothes, standing in front of their house. The 2-year-old is clutching a toy airplane. The cruel irony is never commented on, but impossible to miss. Next to the photo is the kitchen knife, recovered from the garden where their bodies were found. A note explains Haruko's choice in clinical terms, but the final line breaks your heart. After the war, Haruko's sister said, "She was always a good mother. She protected them the only way she could." Can you imagine being forced to make that choice? Can you imagine calculating that death by your own hand is preferable to what's coming? That's not hypothetical philosophy or moral abstraction. That's what happened to real people on March 9, 1945. In 2005, on the 60th anniversary of the raid, a group of American veterans who flew in the Tokyo firebombing returned to Japan. Most were in their 80s, survivors themselves now, carrying different scars. They came to apologize and to seek some form of reconciliation. A small ceremony was held at the site of the Sumida River, where so many had died. The veterans stood on one side, Japanese survivors on the other. For a long moment, no one spoke. What could you say? How do you apologize for burning someone's family alive? How do you forgive the people who destroyed your world? Finally, one of the veterans, a former tail gunner named James Hartwell, stepped forward. He was crying. "I was 22 years old," he said through a translator. "They told us we were ending the war, saving lives. I believed them. I still believe they believed it. But that doesn't change what we did. I'm sorry doesn't mean anything, I know. But I'm sorry anyway." A Japanese survivor, an elderly man who lost his wife and daughter in the raid, crossed over. He stood in front of Hartwell for a long moment. Then he embraced him. Both men sobbed. Others joined them. Veterans and survivors, former enemies, now just old men and women, united by shared trauma and mutual understanding that war had betrayed them all. It didn't fix anything. The dead remained dead. The trauma remained. But it was something, an acknowledgement that everyone involved, the young men in the B-29s following orders, the families huddled in shelters, the planners making impossible choices, were all caught in a machine greater than themselves, grinding toward an inevitable horror. March 9, 2025, marks the 80th anniversary of the Tokyo firebombing. Most Americans won't know. It's not in our national consciousness the way Pearl Harbor, or D-Day, or even Hiroshima are. We've collectively chosen to remember certain things and forget others. This is understandable. No nation wants to dwell on the times it committed acts that, in another context, we'd call atrocities. But Michiko Kiyo-oka did tell you, through the journalist Amy Nakamura, that forgetting is the only real sin. Not because remembering changes what happened, but because forgetting guarantees it will happen again. And it has happened again. Not in the same way, not on the same scale, but the logic that made the Tokyo firebombing possible, the idea that massive civilian casualties are acceptable if they serve a strategic purpose, that logic is alive and well. When we debate drone strikes in Yemen or Pakistan, we're having the Curtis LeMay conversation. When we discuss economic sanctions that primarily harm civilian populations, we're doing the utilitarian calculus that justified Operation Meetinghouse. When we talk about acceptable collateral damage, we're using euphemisms to make mass death palatable, just as the term firebombing sanitizes what actually happened. We burned people alive. The question isn't whether war is terrible. Everyone agrees war is terrible. The question is whether there are limits to what we're willing to do to win. And if there are limits, who decides what they are? Who speaks for the people who become statistics in someone else's strategic calculation? Curtis LeMay believed he was preventing greater suffering. He believed the rules of warfare had to adapt to modern technology and total war. He believed that squeamishness about civilian casualties was a luxury that prolonged conflicts and ultimately cost more lives. He was probably right about some of this, but he was definitely wrong about one thing, that killing 100,000 people in 6 hours could ever be reduced to a moral calculation where the math comes out clean. Some acts are so massive in scale, so complete in their destruction, that they transcend normal ethical frameworks. They become events that define what we're capable of as a species, and they should terrify us. On that March night in 1945, we discovered that humans had evolved, technologically if not morally, to the point where we could destroy entire cities in hours. We could kill faster than medieval kingdoms could wage entire wars. We had become, in some terrifying sense, gods of destruction. And the evidence from every conflict since suggests we still haven't figured out how to be responsible with that power. Michiko Kiyo-oka died in 2009 at age 81. Her last request was that her ashes be scattered in the Sumida River, joining the thousands who died there 64 years earlier. Her sister Fumiko's ashes were scattered with her. Their mother, who survived until 1978, had requested the same. The 3 women who survived that night together would spend eternity together in the same water where they'd witnessed such horror. At Michiko's funeral, Amy Nakamura, the journalist who'd interviewed her 7 years earlier, read from Michiko's final interview. "I don't hate Americans," Michiko had said. "I hate what was done to us. I hate that it can be done. I hate that we live in a world where burning 100,000 people alive can be justified with graphs and statistics and the promise that it's for the greater good. Because once you accept that logic, once you agree that mass murder can be the right choice, there's no act too terrible to justify. You've lost something essential about your humanity." She continued, "The young men in those B-29s weren't monsters. Curtis LeMay wasn't a monster. That's what makes it so terrifying. Monsters we can identify and fight. But what happened to Tokyo was done by ordinary people who believed they were doing the right thing. And that means any of us, given the right circumstances, the right pressures, the right justifications, could do the same. That's the real lesson of Tokyo. Not that war is hell. Everyone knows war is hell. That normal, decent people can create hell on earth and sleep at night because they've convinced themselves it's necessary." The journalist Amy Nakamura went on to write a book about the Tokyo firebombing, incorporating both her grandfather's diary and Michiko's testimony. It was well reviewed, but didn't sell particularly well. Americans weren't eager to read about their country's role in mass civilian casualties. The book did better in Japan, where it contributed to ongoing debates about how to teach World War II history. Her grandfather's diary, when finally published, contained an entry from March 10, 1945, the day after the raid. It read, "We got back to Guam around dawn. The mission was classified as a success, not a single plane lost. I went to my tent and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fires. I could smell the smoke. It was in my clothes, my hair, probably my lungs. I threw up twice. At the debriefing, they told us we'd struck a major blow for freedom, that we'd shortened the war, that American boys who would have died invading Japan would now live. I tried to believe it, but I kept thinking about a philosophy class I took at university, about whether the end justifies the means. The professor said there are some means so terrible that no end can justify them. I argued with him. I said that in the real world, sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to do good. I was 23 years old and I knew everything. Now I'm 23 years old and I know nothing except this. Tonight, I helped kill more people than I can count, and I'll carry that until the day I die. Does it matter if it was necessary? Does necessity absolve us? I don't know. God help me, I don't know." He never talked about the raid with his family. He had a good life, married, 3 children, a successful career. But his daughter found a bottle of sleeping pills in his medicine cabinet and asked why he took them. "I don't sleep well," he told her. He took them every night for 40 years. This is the full cost of the Tokyo firebombing. 100,000 dead in a single night, but also the lifetime trauma of survivors like Michiko, the delayed death of people like Fumiko, the moral injury carried by airmen like Amy Nakamura's grandfather, and the ongoing national amnesia that allows us to forget it happened at all. So why does this matter now, 80 years later? Because the decisions we make about warfare today are still based on the same logic that Curtis LeMay used to justify Operation Meetinghouse. We still calculate acceptable casualties. We still weigh strategic objectives against human costs. We still convince ourselves that killing civilians is regrettable but necessary. And as our weapons become more precise, drone strikes instead of carpet bombing, smart munitions instead of incendiaries, we tell ourselves we've evolved, that modern warfare is more humane. But precision just means we've become better at killing exactly who we want to kill. It doesn't change the fundamental question. Is it ever acceptable to deliberately take civilian lives in pursuit of military objectives? If your answer is yes, and there are legitimate strategic and ethical arguments for yes, then you have to be willing to look at the photos from Tokyo on March 10, 1945. You have to be willing to imagine Michiko running through burning streets with her dying sister. You have to be willing to think about Haruko Yamashita cutting her children's throats in a garden. You have to be willing to smell what Curtis LeMay's crews smelled at 5,000 feet. If your answer is no, and there are equally legitimate moral and legal arguments for no, then you have to be willing to imagine the alternative. Operation Downfall, an invasion of Japan, American soldiers dying by the thousands on Japanese beaches, Japanese civilians, convinced by their government that Americans were demons who would torture and murder them, committing mass suicide or fighting with bamboo spears. The war dragging on for another year, maybe two, with millions dead on both sides. There's no clean answer. There never was. Curtis LeMay understood this, even if he couldn't articulate it. Michiko Kiyo-oka understood it, even if she couldn't accept it. The young airmen who flew the mission understood it, even if it broke some of them. War forces impossible choices. Always has, always will. But what we can choose is whether to remember those choices honestly, to confront the full reality of what war demands from those who wage it and those who suffer it. We can choose to resist the comfortable narratives that make us always heroes or always victims. We can choose to sit with the discomfort of knowing that sometimes there are no good options, only terrible ones and slightly less terrible ones. The Tokyo firebombing was the deadliest air raid in human history. It killed more people in 6 hours than died in most medieval wars over decades. It was also, arguably, a strategic success that contributed to ending the most destructive conflict in human history. Both things are true. Both things matter. On March 9, 2025, there will be ceremonies in Tokyo. Elderly survivors, fewer each year, will gather at the Sumida River. They'll throw flowers into the water. They'll whisper names. Some will cry. Most of the world won't notice. In America, March 9th will be a Friday. Most people will go to work, go to school, live their lives without knowing what day it is in the history of warfare. This isn't malice. It's just human nature. We remember what serves our narrative and forget what complicates it. But Michiko Kiyo-oka's voice echoes across 80 years. Forgetting is the only real sin. Because when we forget what we're capable of, the full horror and the full necessity, the impossible choices and the massive consequences, we lose the ability to make better choices next time. And there will be a next time. There always is. The weapons change, the justifications evolve, but the fundamental question remains. What are we willing to do to win? What lines won't we cross? And when we cross them, because sometimes we will, do we at least have the courage to remember it honestly? That night in Tokyo, March 9, 1945, humans discovered we could burn a city and everyone in it. We've had that knowledge for 80 years now. The question is what we do with it. Do we pretend it never happened, file it away as a regrettable necessity of a war long past? Or do we look directly at what we're capable of, feel the full weight of it, and carry that knowledge into every decision we make about war and peace? Curtis LeMay died believing he'd made the right choice. Michiko Kiyo-oka died believing no one should ever have to make that choice. They're both gone now, along with most of their generation. Soon, everyone who remembers that night will be gone. Only the history remains. And history is just words on a page, unless someone reads it, understands it, and refuses to forget. So here you are, at the end of this story. You know now what happened on the deadliest night in the history of warfare. You know the numbers. 100,000 dead, 16 square miles burned, 1 million homeless. You know the names. Curtis LeMay, Michiko Kiyo-oka, Haruko Yamashita, Saburo Ienaga. You know the choices that were made and the prices that were paid. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you remember the names, the faces, the screaming numbers that can't scream for themselves? Will you let this complicate your understanding of war, of morality, of what nations are willing to do in pursuit of victory? Or will you close this window, move on to the next thing, and let Tokyo slip back into the comfortable shadows of forgotten history? Michiko Kiyo-oka spent 60 years throwing flowers into a river, keeping memory alive because no one else would. The least we can do is remember her name. Remember what happened to her city. Remember that 100,000 people who did nothing more than live in the wrong place at the wrong time, died in a fire we started. Remember, so that the next time someone calculates acceptable casualties and justifies mass killing with strategic necessity, we at least pause. We at least ask the hard questions. We at least honor the dead by acknowledging they were real people with real names, not statistics in someone's moral equation. That's all Michiko ever wanted. Not revenge, not reparations, just memory, just acknowledgement, just a refusal to let her neighbors disappear into the fog of history's convenient amnesia. 80 years later, on a planet still at war, still making impossible choices, still trying to figure out the rules of engagement for weapons that can level cities, we owe her that much. We owe them all. Remember Tokyo. Remember March 9, 1945. Remember what we're capable of, for better and worse. And maybe, just maybe, we'll make better choices next time. If you've stayed with this story to the end, you're part of keeping their memory alive. Share this story, not because it makes you feel good, it shouldn't, but because forgetting serves no one. The algorithm won't promote difficult truths unless you help it. Hit subscribe, not for me, but for Michiko, for Fumiko, for the 100,000 who can't tell their own stories. History's deadliest air raid isn't just history, it's a lesson we're still learning. Don't let it become a lesson we forget.